The sky above the planet Valian had always been the color of deep copper. Every morning, when the twin suns rose from behind the great mountains of Kor, the clouds turned a shade of orange so rich and warm that even the oldest elder of the Valley people would stop walking and look up. It was one of those things that never got old. No matter how many years passed, no matter how much the world changed around them, the sunrise on Valian always made a person pause and feel something deep inside their chest. Serafina Val stood at the edge of the open-air market in the city of Velos and watched the sky change color. She was 22 years old by Valley count, which would have made her roughly 19 in Earth years, though she had never heard of Earth. She had never heard of humans. She had never heard of the species that would, before this day was over, change everything she thought she knew about the universe. Serafina was not what the other Valley would call beautiful in the traditional sense. She was tall and thin, like most of her people, with silver skin that caught the light in soft, shifting ways depending on the angle of the suns. Her eyes were large and deep violet, the kind of violet that looked almost too vivid to be real. Her hair was long and pale, the color of white sand, and it floated slightly around her shoulders in the magnetic field that every Valley body naturally produced. She had a small, sharp face, high cheekbones, and hands with 4 long fingers that moved constantly when she talked, because the Valley spoke not just with words but with hand movements that added meaning and emotion to every sentence. She was carrying a basket of blue root vegetables and a cloth bag full of dried herb bundles, walking slowly through the crowded morning market, nodding at the vendors she recognized and pausing to smell the spiced oils that an old woman sold from a cart near the fountain. The market smelled of warm stone and sweet smoke and something that was almost like cinnamon but not quite. Beside her walked her younger brother, Oren. He was 16, shorter than her, with the same silver skin and violet eyes but rounder features and a wild energy that made him seem like he was always about to run somewhere. He was chewing on a piece of dried fruit and talking nonstop the way he always did in the morning. "I heard Elder Marin say that the council is meeting again today," Oren said, waving his hand in a gesture that meant "and I think it matters. 3rd time this week. Something is going on. Something they are not telling the people." "The council always meets," Serafina said, adjusting the basket on her arm. "That is their job. 3 times in 1 week is not normal," Oren said. "And I saw Commander Dale walking toward the signal tower last night. But after the second moon had already crossed the midline. Why would the commander of the Sky Guard be going to the signal tower in the middle of the night?" Serafina glanced at him. "Maybe he could not sleep." "Sarah." Oren gave her a look that meant please be serious. "Something is happening." She did not answer him right away. She picked up a small red herb bundle from the old woman's cart, pressed it between her fingers and breathed in the sharp, clean smell. She paid the woman with 2 blue coins and put the bundle in her cloth bag. The truth was she had noticed things too. Small things, the kind of things that most people would overlook if they were not paying close attention. The Sky Guard had been flying patrols every night for the last 2 weeks. The Council's communication lines had been running longer hours. 3 of the high-range orbital sensors that Serafina had seen listed as inactive in the public data system had quietly gone back online. She worked as a data systems reader for the city's communication office, which meant she spent her days looking at numbers and signals and patterns, and she was very good at noticing when patterns changed. Something had changed. But she did not know what it was yet, and she had learned a long time ago not to speak about things she did not fully understand. "Let us go home," she said to Oren. "Mother will be waiting for the blue roots." Oren groaned but fell into step beside her. They walked out of the market and down the wide stone path that led toward their neighborhood, a cluster of smooth, oval-shaped buildings built into the side of a low hill at the edge of the city. The buildings were made of pale gray stone and had large, curved windows that let in the copper light of the suns. Every building had a small garden plot in front of it, and in the morning most of the neighbors were out tending to their gardens, pruning the silver-leafed plants or watering the wide, flat flowers that bloomed only in the morning hours and closed themselves tight by midday. Their mother, Elara, was standing at the door when they came up the path. She was a tall woman, older than she looked, with deep lines around her eyes that spoke of years of outdoor work and worry and love. She was a healer by profession, one of the most respected in the Velos district, and she had the careful, steady hands and the calm voice that all great healers seemed to carry with them even when they were not working. She looked at the basket Serafina was holding, then looked at her daughter's face, and then she said the thing that Serafina had not expected. "I need to tell you both something," Elara said. "Come inside." Oren looked at Serafina. Serafina looked at her mother. They went inside. The inside of their home was simple and warm. There were no decorations on the walls except for 2 woven tapestries that their grandmother had made, and a shelf of small, smooth stones that Oren had collected from the river over the years. The furniture was low and curved, made of a soft dark wood that grew only in the southern forests. There was a long table in the center of the main room where the family ate every meal together, and in the corner was a communication screen that Alara used for her healer's consultation work. The screen was on. On it was a still image. A grainy image, the kind that came from a long-range sensor that was not designed to capture visual detail, just movement and mass and energy readings. But even in its graininess, even in its blur and its rough edges, the shape on the screen was clear enough to make Serafina go very still. It was a ship. Not a Veli ship. Not a ship from any of the 6 known species of the galaxy, none of which had visited Valian in over 40 years. Not anything that matched the visual database of known vessels that every data systems reader like Serafina had been trained to recognize. It was something else. It was large. It was angular in a way that Veli ships were not. It had straight lines where Veli ships had curves, hard edges where Veli ships had smooth slopes. It looked almost aggressive in its shape, the way a sharp stone looks aggressive lying next to a smooth one. It had no visible markings. No running lights of any known color. No identification signal that the sensors had been able to read. It was sitting in a slow orbit around Valian's outer atmospheric layer. Just sitting there. Not moving. Not sending signals. Not doing anything. Just there. When did this appear? Serafina asked. Her voice was very quiet. Late last night, Alara said. The council has known since before dawn. They have not made a public announcement yet. I heard it from Healer Dorn, who heard it from the medical officer at the Skyguard station. One ship, Oren said, staring at the image. Just one? Just one, Alara confirmed. What kind of ship is it? Oren asked. Who does it belong to? Alara looked at her children with eyes that held a very specific emotion, the kind of emotion that sits right between calm and fear, the way a person looks when they are trying to stay steady while the ground is moving beneath their feet. Nobody knows, she said. Outside, the copper morning sky continued to glow in its usual warm and beautiful way. The flowers in the garden were still open. The birds were still singing in the silver trees. The market sounds drifted on the wind from 2 streets over. But something had changed in the world of Valian. Something enormous was waiting above them. And no one knew what it wanted. The Council of the Los met in the great circular chamber at the center of the city, a room with a domed ceiling made of clear crystal that let the copper sky in from above. On any other day, the light through that ceiling made the chamber feel like a place of warmth and wisdom. Today it felt like a fishbowl, a place where everything inside was visible to whatever was watching from above. Elder Marin stood at the center of the chamber floor. She was the oldest member of the council, over 90 years by Veli count, and she carried herself with the kind of absolute steadiness that only comes from having survived many things that should have broken a person. Her silver skin had faded to almost white with age, and her violet eyes had gone pale, almost gray, but they were sharp. Terrifyingly sharp. Around her, in the curved rows of seats that rose in a gentle slope from the chamber floor, sat the 42 members of the full council, along with 12 military commanders, 8 chief scientists, and a handful of senior communication officers, one of whom was Serafina's direct supervisor, a quiet man named Aldrin. Serafina should not have been there. She was not a council member. She was not a military commander or a chief scientist. She was a mid-level data systems reader, and she had absolutely no business being inside the great chamber during a closed emergency session. But Aldrin had sent for her specifically, which meant she walked through the doors with a small card that marked her as present by authorized request, and she sat in the back row of the observers section and tried to look like she belonged there, which was not easy when her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. The reason Aldrin had sent for her became clear within the first 10 minutes of the session. The anomaly in the signal pattern, Elder Marin said, gesturing to the large display screen at the front of the chamber, which showed a complex wave pattern of incoming signal data, was first detected 6 days ago. Our initial assessment was instrument error. Our second assessment was a natural atmospheric phenomenon. Our third assessment, conducted this morning after the visual confirmation of the vessel in orbital position, is that it is neither of those things. The signal pattern on the screen was strange. Serafina had been looking at signal data for 4 years and she had never seen anything like it. It was not random the way natural signals were. It was structured, patterned, but the pattern was not any known Veli pattern or any pattern from any species in the records. It had a rhythm to it, almost like a heartbeat but more complex, with layers of subpatterns running underneath the main beat like rivers under a river. We believe this is a communication attempt, Elder Marin continued. We believe whoever is aboard that vessel has been sending this signal for 6 days and waiting for a response. A communication attempt in an unknown language, said Commander Dale from the military row. He was a broad man with a hard face and steady eyes. Which means we have been ignoring them for 6 days without knowing we were doing it. Correct, said the chief scientist, a woman named Pell, who had the slightly wild look of someone who had not slept in a long time. We have essentially been sitting here while someone knocked on our door for 6 days and we did not answer because we did not recognize the knock. There was a murmur through the chamber. Not panic but something close to it. A low, uncomfortable sound. Can we decode the signal? Elder Marin asked. That, said Aldrin, standing from his seat and looking back at Serafina in the observers section, is why I asked one of my data readers to be present today. Every face in the chamber turned toward Serafina. She stood up. She kept her hands still at her sides, which took effort. She spoke clearly. I have been working on the signal pattern since Aldrin shared it with me 2 days ago, she said. I did not know at that time what it was connected to. I thought it was a systems anomaly from one of our deep space sensors. But I have been mapping the structure of the signal, and I believe I have found a pattern within the pattern. She paused. Every eye in the chamber was on her. The outer signal, the one our systems have been reading, is what I would call a carrier wave. It is like the envelope of a letter. But inside it there is a second signal, much weaker and more compressed. And that inner signal is using a mathematical base structure. Mathematical, said Commander Dale. Numbers, Serafina said. Prime numbers specifically. The first 47 prime numbers in sequence, repeated with variations. It is a mathematical handshake. It is the kind of signal you send when you are trying to communicate with someone you have never spoken to before and you want to establish first that you understand numbers because numbers are universal. It is the most basic possible proof that you are an intelligent being trying to make contact. The chamber was very quiet. Elder Marin looked at Serafina for a long moment. Then she said, You are certain? I am certain of the mathematical structure, Serafina said. I am certain it is deliberate. I am certain it is intelligent. What I cannot tell you is anything about who sent it or what they want. One ship, said Pell quietly, almost to herself. One ship sending a mathematical handshake for 6 days. Not an invasion fleet. Not a weapons deployment. One ship being patient, being careful, trying to say hello in the only language that needs no translation. The chamber absorbed that for a moment. Can we respond? Elder Marin asked. Yes, Serafina said. If you authorize the signal tower to transmit on the same frequency band, I can prepare a response using the same mathematical structure. We continue the prime number sequence. We add our own variation. We let them know we received their message and we understand it. And then what? Commander Dale asked. He did not sound hostile, just cautious, the way a careful soldier always sounds when entering unknown territory. And then, Serafina said, we wait and see what they say back. Elder Marin looked around the chamber at the council members, the commanders, the scientists. She looked at the image of the angular ship on the display screen. She looked at the signal pattern with its strange rhythm and its hidden mathematical heartbeat. Then she said, prepare the response. Serafina Val will lead the communication team. Serafina sat back down. Her hands, now that no one was looking at her anymore, were shaking very slightly. Not from fear exactly. From something more complicated than fear. From the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something so enormous that she could not see its shape yet. That she was about to take a step into the unknown and that the step could not be taken back. Oren would have called it exciting. Serafina called it terrifying. They were probably both right. The signal tower of the Los stood on a high ridge at the northern edge of the city, a tall, narrow structure of dark metal that had been built 40 years ago to maintain long-range communication with the orbital stations and deep space survey ships. It had not been used for first-contact communication before. No one alive had ever used anything for first-contact communication. The last time the Veli had made contact with a new species was before Elder Marin was born, and the records from that contact were stored in the deep archive and had not been opened in decades. Serafina spent the rest of that morning and all of the afternoon preparing the response signal. She worked in the signal tower's main operations room, a round space filled with screens and control panels, with 2 other data readers, a young man named Kale and an older woman named Tef, who both understood signals but had never done anything like this before either. Nobody had. The response Serafina constructed was simple. She took the prime number sequence that the unknown ship had been sending, continued it from where it had stopped, and added a new layer underneath it. The new layer was a simple binary count, 1 and 0, building into a pattern of beats that encoded a very basic mathematical truth, the Veli equivalent of saying we hear you, we understand numbers, we are intelligent, we are here. She checked it 6 times. Kale checked it twice more. Tef ran it through the pattern verification system 3 times. Then Serafina sent it. The signal left the tower at the speed of light. Given the orbital position of the unknown ship, it would reach them in approximately 4 seconds. Serafina counted the seconds in her head while staring at the monitoring screen. 4 seconds out. 4 seconds for a response to come back, if the response was immediate. 8 seconds total. She counted to 8. Nothing came. She counted to 20. Nothing. Maybe they are analyzing our signal, Kale said. He was young, maybe 18, and he was working very hard to look calm. Maybe, Serafina said. She counted to 60. 1 full minute. Nothing. Perhaps our signal did not reach them, Tef said. It reached them, Serafina said. She was looking at the monitoring data. I can see the confirmation in the atmospheric bounce back. The signal left our atmosphere intact. It reached the orbital layer. She kept watching the screen. 3 minutes passed. Then 4. Then 5. Then, at 5 minutes and 43 seconds after her signal had been sent, the monitoring screen lit up. Something was coming back. The three of them leaned toward the screen simultaneously, like plants leaning toward light. The incoming signal was different from the first one. The carrier wave was the same, but the inner structure had changed. The prime number sequence had been continued, exactly as Serafina's response had continued it, and then something new had been added on top of it. Not numbers this time. Something more complex. Something that looked, in the pattern visualization on the screen, almost like a grid. A grid, Kale said, staring. They are sending a grid pattern. They are trying to establish a coordinate system, Serafina said, her mind working fast. They continued our number sequence to confirm they understood us. Now they are giving us a spatial grid. They are trying to show us that they know space, location, coordinates. Why? Tef asked. Serafina thought about it. Her fingers moved over the control panel, pulling up layers of the signal, examining the structure of the grid pattern. The grid was divided into sections. Some sections were marked differently from others, heavier, more defined. They are showing us a map, she said slowly. Or part of a map. They are showing us where they are from. She paused. Or where we are. The weight of that sentence settled over the room like a heavy cloth. Wherever this ship had come from, whoever was aboard it, they knew exactly where Valian was. They had the coordinates. They had found them on purpose. This was not an accidental encounter, not a random deep space crossing. Someone had looked at the universe, had found Valian on a map, and had come here deliberately. For what reason was still unknown. But they were there on purpose. That night, Serafina stayed in the signal tower while Kale and Tef went home to sleep. Elder Marin had authorized round-the-clock monitoring and had assigned Serafina as the primary communication analyst on a temporary emergency basis, which meant she had a cot in the back room of the operations space and a supply of food from the council stores and permission to contact any resource in the city that she needed. She did not sleep. She sat in front of the monitoring screen and worked on the signal, pulling it apart layer by layer, mapping the structure, looking for more hidden patterns, more information tucked inside the mathematics. At some point around the middle of the night, when the second moon was high and the copper sky had turned to deep blue-black outside the tower windows, she found something. Deep inside the signal, beneath the carrier wave and the prime number sequence in the coordinate grid, there was a third layer. The weakest of all, barely detectable, and so compressed that the automated systems had missed it entirely. But Serafina had been staring at signal patterns for 4 years and her eyes, tired as they were, caught the faint irregularity. She isolated the layer. She amplified it. She ran it through every pattern-matching algorithm the communication system had. And what came back made her sit very still in the dark operations room for a long time, with the blue-black sky outside and the hum of the equipment around her and the distant sound of the city sleeping below. The third layer was audio. Sound. A voice. Broken up, compressed, distorted by the compression it had been stored in, and in a language she had never heard before, but unmistakably a voice. There was rhythm to it, breath patterns, the rise and fall of speech. It was not music. It was not a recording of nature sounds. It was a living being speaking, or a recording of a living being speaking, tucked into the deepest layer of the signal like a message in a bottle, hidden inside another message inside another message. Serafina listened to it 7 times. She could not understand a single word. But she could hear in the voice something she had not expected to hear. She had expected authority. Command. The voice of something powerful and unknown announcing its presence. What she heard instead was something that made her chest feel strange and tight. She heard nervousness. The voice was careful, slow, deliberate in a way that spoke of effort and concentration, the way someone sounds when they are trying very hard to say something clearly in a situation that matters enormously to them. But underneath the careful control, like a current under still water, there was tension. There was something that sounded remarkably, shockingly like uncertainty. Like someone who did not know how this was going to go. like someone who was hoping very hard that the people they were talking to would not be afraid of them. Serafina sat in the dark and listened to the alien voice for a long time. Then she opened a new communication channel to Elder Marin's private line and said, "Elder, I need you to hear something." By the next morning, all of the Los knew. There was no official announcement from the council, not yet, but information in a city of 200,000 people moves through its own channels regardless of what the council decides. And by the time the first sun rose and the copper light began to spread across the rooftops, most of the people of the Los were standing in their gardens or leaning out their windows or gathering in small, quiet groups on the stone paths between buildings, looking up at the sky and talking in low voices. Oren came to the signal tower just after dawn. He showed his student identification card to the guard at the base of the tower, which of course gave him no access at all, but Serafina had put his name on a visitor list because she had known he would come and she had wanted to avoid the scene he would inevitably create if turned away. He found her in the operations room, dark circles under her eyes, a half-eaten piece of bread on the console beside her. Her hair still floating slightly from the overnight magnetic field charge. Her body was running in low-power mode. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you," she said. He sat in Kale's empty chair and looked at the screens. "Is it real? What they are saying in the streets?" "What are they saying in the streets?" "That there is an alien ship. A real one. Not ours, not anyone we know. Something new. Something that has never been here before." "Yes," Serafina said. "That part is true." Oren was quiet for a moment. He was 16 and he had the energy of someone who was almost always ready to be excited about things, but right now he was still looking at the screens with eyes that were working hard to understand the size of what he was looking at. "What kind of aliens?" he asked. "We do not know yet," she said. "We have been communicating through mathematical signals. We have not established a visual connection or a language connection." "But you heard a voice," Oren said. "Everybody is saying you found a voice in the signal." Serafina looked at him. "News travels fast. Mother called the healer station this morning looking for you," Oren said. Healer Dorn's assistant said that the council communication office had been up all night over an audio discovery. "So," he shrugged. "You heard a voice." "I heard a voice," she confirmed. "I cannot understand it. But yes." "What did it sound like?" Serafina thought about how to answer that. She looked at the screen where the signal data was still running, the constant incoming heartbeat of the carrier wave that the ship above them continued to send, steady as breathing. "It sounded careful," she said finally. "It sounded like someone who wanted very much to say the right thing." Oren absorbed that. Then he said, "That is not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Something scarier." "It might still be scary," Serafina said. "I have not figured out everything yet." But even as she said it, she knew that what she had heard in that voice was not the sound of threat. She had spent enough time studying communication patterns to know what aggression sounded like in a signal, the sharp, over-defined edges, the hard redundancies, the patterns that repeated like commands. What she had heard in the voice was different. Softer. More layered. More like a question than a statement. At mid-morning, Elder Marin arrived at the signal tower with Commander Dale and Chief Scientist Pell and 2 council members whose names Serafina did not know. They gathered in the operations room, which was now quite crowded, and Serafina played the audio for them on the room's speaker system. The alien voice filled the room. Slow, careful, in its unknown language, with that undercurrent of controlled nervousness that Serafina had first noticed in the deep hours of the night. When it ended, the room was very quiet. Commander Dale said, "We need a language bridge. Without the ability to communicate in words, we are stuck in mathematics. Mathematics can convey information, but it cannot convey intent. Not fully. A language bridge takes time," Pell said. "Building one from zero shared vocabulary with a species we have never encountered, that is months of work at minimum. Unless," Serafina said carefully, "they have already started doing the same thing on their end." Everyone looked at her. "They sent us mathematical signals first," she said. "The coordinate grid. The prime number sequence. These are the tools you use to establish a foundation when you do not share a language. But the audio signal was different. The audio signal was not mathematics. It was language. Their language. Which we cannot understand," Dale said. "Which we cannot understand yet," Serafina said. "But think about what they did. They sent the mathematics first, to build trust and establish a shared framework. Then they sent the language layer, compressed and hidden, not as a demand that we understand it immediately but as an offering. A gift. They were saying, here is the next step if you are willing to take it." She pulled up a new screen and began overlaying the audio signal onto the mathematical pattern. If they are intelligent enough to build mathematical signals this sophisticated, they are intelligent enough to be working on a language bridge from their side too. They have our signal. They have been analyzing it for 6 days before we even knew they were there. They may have more data on us than we have on them. Pell leaned forward, looking at the overlay Serafina had constructed. Her expression shifted from tired to something sharper and more alive. If they have been monitoring our communications generally, not just the response signal we sent, then they might have intercepted our open broadcast frequencies. The public channels. The entertainment broadcasts. The news. And if they have been working on understanding our language from those broadcasts, Serafina said, then the next signal they send to us might be more than mathematics. The room absorbed this. Elder Marin looked at the screen for a long time. Then she said, send them another signal. Continue the mathematical exchange but add something new. Add language. Use simple words, short sentences, basic vocabulary. Give them as much material to work with as we can. And ask a question, Pell said suddenly. A simple question. One they can answer with a yes or a no. Something that requires them to respond in a way that is unmistakable. Serafina nodded. She was already building the new signal in her head, layer by layer. I know what question to ask, she said. She prepared the signal over the next 2 hours. The mathematics came first, a continuation of the exchange they had been building, a few new elements that added complexity and showed increasing sophistication. Then, layered carefully on top of it, she added language. 50 simple words in Veli, each one repeated in a pattern that connected it to a number or a mathematical concept, building a tiny preliminary dictionary, a seed from which a language bridge might grow. And then, at the very end, in the simplest and most direct combination of mathematical and linguistic elements she could construct, she asked the question, "Are you alone?" The signal went up. The 4-second wait. The monitoring screen. The room full of people holding very still. And then, 47 minutes later, not 4 seconds, not the near-instant response of the first exchange, but 47 minutes of silence while the ship above them presumably did something with what it had received, the answer came back. It was not in mathematics. It was in Veli. Broken, imperfect, structured oddly in ways that made the grammar slightly strange, but unmistakably, shockingly, heart-stoppingly Veli. 2 words. Not alone. Commander Dale said something under his breath that was not suitable for the record. Chief Scientist Pell pressed both hands flat against the console and leaned on them like her legs had stopped working. Elder Marin did not move or speak for almost a full minute. And Serafina, who had spent the last 36 hours running on no sleep and the pure raw energy of something she could not name, felt tears come into her eyes without warning, which surprised her so much that she almost laughed. Not alone. Somewhere up there, in that angular ship with its straight lines and its hard edges, in the dark and the cold and the vast silence of orbital space, there was not one being but more than one. A crew. Team. A group of people, or whatever word they used for themselves, who had come together across the darkness and found this copper-skied world and spent 6 days carefully, patiently, hopefully trying to say hello. Not alone. Neither were the Veli anymore. The council voted that evening to attempt a visual communication. It was not a unanimous vote. 8 council members voted against it, arguing that moving too fast was dangerous, that they knew almost nothing about the species in that ship, that visual contact was a significant escalation from signal exchange, that caution was more important than curiosity. 12 members abstained, uncertain. 22 voted yes. Elder Marin cast the deciding vote herself, which was unusual. Normally she guided the council to decisions without putting her own vote on the scales. But she looked at the screen with the 2 words on it, not alone, and she said, "We vote yes," and that was the end of the debate. Serafina spent the evening preparing the visual communication protocol. This was more complex than the signal exchange had been. The Veli had visual communication technology that could establish a real-time 2-way holographic link, but it required both sides to have compatible transmission equipment. She had no idea what the ship above them had. So she sent a simpler offer. A transmission format description. An invitation. In the fragile building language bridge they had begun to construct, layered carefully with mathematics, she tried to say, "We would like to see you if you are willing to let us, and we are willing to let you see us." The response came back in less than an hour this time. It was an acceptance. And it came with something else, something that Serafina had to analyze 3 times before she was sure of what she was reading. They sent a name. Not an individual name. A species name. Human. Serafina said it out loud. Human. The word felt strange in her mouth, made of sounds that were not typical Veli sounds but that the language bridge was already beginning to accommodate. Human. What does it mean? Kale asked. It is what they call themselves, Serafina said. That is their name. Human, Elder Marin repeated, trying the word in the same careful way. And they are not alone. There are multiple humans on that ship. Yes. How many humans exist? Commander Dale asked. He had been very quiet for the last hour, sitting in the back corner of the operations room with his arms crossed and his hard face focused on the screens. He asked questions rather than making statements, which was how Serafina could tell he was operating in the mode he called taking measure rather than making a decision. Unknown, Serafina said. The information we have does not extend to population data. A species we have never heard of, Dale said. Never encountered. Not in our records, not in the records of any of the 6 known species. A species that has one ship over our planet and calls itself human. Yes, Serafina said. And we are about to put their image on a screen in the council chamber, Dale said. It was not quite a question and not quite a statement. Yes, Elder Marin said. We are. The visual link was established at the 9th hour of the evening with the council chamber full, with the medical team on standby outside the doors, with Commander Dale's Skyguard on alert status, with most of the council members sitting very straight in their seats in the way people sit when they are trying not to show that they are nervous. The large display screen at the front of the chamber lit up. And on it, for the first time in the history of the Valley people, a human face looked back at them. The room froze. Not in fear exactly. Not in hostility. In something more primitive than either of those things. In the raw, unprocessed shock of otherness. The physical reality of a face that was unmistakably a face, with eyes and a nose and a mouth in roughly the arrangement that the Valley face had them, but so different in every specific detail that the similarity and the difference hit at the same moment, like 2 waves from opposite directions meeting in the same place. The skin was not silver. It was a warm brown, a rich, deep color like polished wood. The eyes were brown too, darker than Valley eyes, smaller, without the large violet depth, but focused and sharp, and Serafina noticed with a catch in her chest, nervous. Very visibly, very clearly nervous. The person on the screen was sitting in a chair in what looked like a control room full of equipment and other figures moving in the background, and they were trying to appear calm and largely succeeding, but the hands that were folded on the surface in front of them were folded tightly, the knuckles slightly pale, the grip just a little too controlled. They were scared. Not aggressive. Not commanding. Scared and trying to be brave despite it. The human on the screen said something. In their own language first, a few words, then haltingly with the imperfect but remarkable grammar of someone who had been working very hard and very fast to learn in Valley, "We are glad to see you." The chamber was absolutely silent. Then Serafina realized that everyone was looking at her, because she was the one who had been managing the communication, and she was the one who was supposed to respond. She stepped forward toward the screen. She looked at the human face looking back at her. The nervous eyes, the tight hands, the careful controlled expression. She said in her own clear voice, "We are glad to see you too." The human on the screen at those words let out a long slow breath. The hands on the surface in front of them unclenched very slightly. And somewhere in the background of the human ship's control room, behind the person on the screen, another figure who Serafina could barely see in the edge of the visual frame made a small gesture, a quick motion with one arm, the universal shape of a person pumping their fist quietly in private relief. Serafina felt her mouth curve into something that was very nearly a smile. They had come all this way. One ship. Across the darkness of space, to a world whose name they had not known, carrying a species name that meant nothing to anyone here, and they were relieved. Genuinely, humanly, unmistakably relieved. Because they had been hoping. They had come all this way hoping that it would be okay. His name was James Cole. He was the captain of the human ship, which was called the Resolute, and he was 41 years old by human reckoning, which Serafina calculated was roughly equivalent to 47 in Valley years given the difference in their planetary cycles. He was not what she had imagined. She had not imagined anything specific, because she had tried hard not to let her imagination run ahead of the facts. But if she was honest with herself, the part of her that did imagine things had expected something colder. Something more distant and formally authoritative. A species that arrived in a single ship, alone, above an inhabited world, and sent mathematical signals for 6 days, seemed like it should belong to a being of iron composure and calculated intent. James Cole was composed, yes. He was clearly a man who had spent a long time learning how to stay steady in difficult situations. But he was also warm in a way that came through even across the visual communication link, even through the imperfect and still developing language bridge, even across the impossible distance of everything that separated their two species. He smiled. Humans smiled. The Valley had an equivalent expression, a softening of the face and a particular set of eye movements, but it was subtler and less physically visible than the human smile, which was a large, open expression that involved showing the teeth in what had startled several council members quite badly on first sight and required Serafina to quickly explain that showing teeth among humans was a positive gesture, not a threat display. Over the 3 days that followed the first visual contact, Serafina spoke with Captain James Cole for a total of 9 hours across 6 separate communication sessions. The language bridge was growing rapidly, fed on both sides by intense effort and the natural momentum that builds when two intelligent beings are genuinely trying to understand each other. By the second day they could hold a halting but real conversation. By the third day they could speak in something close to full sentences on both sides, with gaps and corrections and frequent pauses, but with meaning crossing cleanly most of the time. She learned things. Many things. Humans came from a planet called Earth. Earth was not in the immediate galactic neighborhood of Valian. It was several dozen light years away, which was why no Vali ship had ever encountered them and vice versa. Earth had a single sun and a single moon and a surface that was mostly covered in a substance called ocean, which was a vast expanse of liquid water so immense that it took days to cross even by fast ship. The sky above Earth was blue, not copper, and the light was different, softer in some ways, harsher in others. Humans were, by the standards of galactic civilization, very young. They had not been traveling between star systems for long. They had been developing as a species for hundreds of thousands of years, but their space travel technology was recent, their reach into the galaxy was still limited, and the Resolute was not a military vessel or an exploration command ship in the sense that the Vali would recognize. It was something the humans called a scout, a small, fast ship designed to go ahead of the larger community and look and listen and make contact. "How many of you are on the Resolute?" Serafina asked during the third communication session. James Cole, whose face she was beginning to be able to read with more accuracy each day, showed a small, slightly rueful expression that she had begun to associate with humor that was slightly self-deprecating. 23, he said. Serafina looked at the size of the ship in the orbital sensor images. "That ship can carry more than 23. "Yes," he said. "It can carry 42. But this kind of mission, when you are going to a world where you do not know what you will find, you do not take more people than you need. Fewer people means fewer variables. Fewer things that can go wrong. Fewer costs if..." He paused, then chose not to finish that sentence in the particular direction it had been heading. "Fewer complications," he said instead. Serafina heard the unfinished sentence anyway. "Fewer costs if things go badly. Fewer lives lost if the unknown world turned out to be hostile." "You were afraid," she said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. James Cole looked at her through the screen with those dark brown eyes that she was beginning to find easier to read than she had expected. "Yes," he said, with the plainness of someone who had decided that honesty was the better path even when it meant admitting something that was not comfortable to admit. "We were afraid." "What were you afraid of?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That you would look at us and see a threat. That the first thing you would feel when you saw our ship would be fear, and that the first thing you would do about that fear would be to arm your defenses and close the door." Serafina thought about Commander Dale and his sky guard on alert status and his arms crossed in the back corner of the operations room. "Some of us did feel that," she said honestly. "Some of us still do." "I know," James said. "That is why we waited. 6 days. We could have established contact on the first day. We chose to wait and signal first so that you would have time to decide how you felt before you saw us. We wanted to give you the choice." Serafina looked at him for a moment. "You came here on purpose," she said. "You knew where we were. You had our coordinates." "Yes." "How?" He seemed to choose his next words carefully. "We have been listening to the universe for a long time," he said. "Humans have been pointing instruments at the sky and listening since long before we could travel to the things we were listening to. And Valian has been broadcasting signals into space for many years. Some of them reach Earth. We have been talking to you for years," Serafina said slowly, "without knowing it." "Without knowing it," he confirmed. "Your science broadcasts. Your public communication channels. Your entertainment programs. You watched our entertainment programs?" The slightly rueful expression came back, stronger this time. "Our language specialists have watched a very significant number of your entertainment programs," he said. "Which is why, when I say that your world stories are very beautiful, I want you to know that I mean it as someone who has had some experience with them." Serafina, for the first time in 5 days of extraordinary events, laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her before she could decide whether to make it, and it was perhaps not the most professionally appropriate response for the primary communication analyst of a first contact situation. But it was real and it was genuine, and James Cole, on the other side of the screen, looked at her with something in his expression that was not quite a smile but was related to one. Something that looked like relief again. Deeper than the first one. The relief of finding that across all the impossible distances of species and world and language and culture, something as small and human and veiley as an unexpected laugh could still cross the gap. On the 5th day after visual contact was established, Commander Dale asked to speak with Captain Cole directly. Serafina was present for the session as she was for all sessions, but this one was different from the beginning. Dale had prepared. He sat in front of the communication screen with his back straight and his expression controlled and a set of written questions in front of him, and he asked them in order, with precision. He asked about the Resolute's weapons systems, about its speed and range capabilities, about whether there were other human ships in the vicinity, about whether Earth had made contact with any of the 6 known species before coming to Valian, about what humanity's territorial ambitions were, about whether the Resolute carried recording equipment that had been documenting Valian's surface. James Cole answered every question, directly without deflecting or evading. He confirmed that yes, the Resolute had weapons systems, defensive primarily but capable of offensive action. He confirmed that it was fast. He confirmed that there were no other human ships within several light years. He confirmed that humanity had not yet made contact with any of the 6 known species, that Valian was their first contact in this region of the galaxy. He confirmed that yes, there was recording equipment and that it had been running, that they had been documenting the planet from orbit. "You have been recording us without our knowledge or consent," Dale said. It was not a question. "For the first 6 days, yes," James said without flinching. "From orbit, atmospheric and surface observation. After first visual contact was established, we shut down the observation array. We have not recorded anything since." "What were you looking for?" "Everything," James said simply. "Population distribution, technology level, military capability, agriculture, energy production. We were trying to understand what kind of people you are before we introduced ourselves." "Why?" James paused. This was the kind of pause Serafina had learned, that meant he was choosing carefully between several honest answers and trying to find the one that was most complete. "Because we wanted to know if you would be frightened by us," he said. "And we wanted to know if we should be frightened of you." "And what did your observation tell you?" Dale asked. "It told me," James said, "that you are a peaceful world. That your cities are spread out and open, not fortified. That your technology is sophisticated but your military infrastructure is relatively small for a world of your population. That your broadcasts are full of art and science and everyday life. That you have arguments with each other and disagreements and problems, the way every living society does, but that you do not have the look of a people who are built primarily for war." There was a pause in the room. "And what did your observation tell you about whether we should fear you?" Dale asked. James looked at him through the screen. "It told me that if you wanted to be dangerous, you had every opportunity to be and you chose not to be. It told me that a people who build open cities and fund art and have healers who make house calls are people who have decided that taking care of each other matters more than fortifying against each other." Dale was quiet for a long moment. Serafina watched his face work through something. Then he asked the question that had clearly been waiting at the back of all the other questions. "Why did you come alone? One ship. Why not come with a fleet? Why not show strength?" James looked at him. And then James said something that Serafina thought about for a very long time afterward, something that seemed simple but was actually, the more she turned it over in her mind, one of the most significant things she had heard in her life. "Because," James said, "we learned a long time ago that when you show up somewhere with a fleet, the conversation that follows is always about the fleet. The fleet becomes the only thing anyone can think about or respond to. A fleet says, 'We are powerful, we are a threat, we are here to demonstrate what we can do to you if you do not cooperate with us.' And then the only conversation possible is a conversation between fear and power." He paused. "We did not want that conversation. We wanted a different one." Dale said, "And if we had been hostile? If we had tried to destroy your single ship? Then we would have been destroyed," James said plainly. "That was the risk. We accepted it." Dale looked at him for a long time. Then he stood up and left the room without another word. Serafina watched him go. She knew his face well enough now to know that the expression he wore as he walked out the door was not hostility or suspicion. It was something harder to name. Something that looked like a man encountering an idea that was inconvenient to him because it was so completely different from the framework he had spent his career operating inside that it required him to go somewhere quiet and rethink things. After Dale left, Elder Marin, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the room throughout the session, said, "Captain Cole, I have one question." "Of course, Elder," James said. "What do you want?" she asked. "You have come all this way, one ship, 23 people, across the dark, to a world you had never visited. You have been patient and careful and honest. I appreciate all of that. But I am 93 years old and I have been leading people for most of those years, and I have learned that the most important question you can ask anyone is what they want. So I ask you, what does humanity want from Valian? James looked at her. The warm brown eyes, steady now, the controlled nervousness mostly gone over these days of communication and replaced by something calmer and more settled. To know you, he said. To understand you. To share what we know and learn what you know. To have neighbors in the universe instead of being alone in it. Elder Marin studied him for a long moment. That, she said finally, is either the most honest thing I have ever heard, or the most sophisticated lie. I know, James said. I cannot prove which it is. You will have to decide that over time. Elder Marin nodded slowly. Then we will decide it over time, she said. And in the meantime, Captain Cole, we would like to offer your crew the hospitality of our surface, if you are willing to come down. The room went very still. Serafina had not expected this. She did not think anyone had. The council had not voted on this. The military had not been consulted. Elder Marin had simply decided, on her own authority, looking at a human face through a screen for 20 minutes. James Cole looked at Elder Marin with an expression that went through several things in rapid succession. Surprise. Something that flickered for a moment that might have been overwhelm. And then a settling, a steadying, a look of quiet and profound gratitude. We would be honored, he said. The shuttle that carried the first human visitors to the surface of Valian was small and angular, consistent with the overall design language of the Resolute, with hard edges and straight lines and a material surface that reflected the copper light of the suns in an unexpected way, almost like a mirror but not quite, more like something that was absorbing the light and thinking about it before giving it back. Serafina stood in the open field north of the Los that had been cleared as the landing site, flanked by Elder Marin on one side and Commander Dale on the other. Behind them were 40 council representatives, the medical team, 12 Skyguard officers standing at what Dale had described as respectful attention, meaning armed but not visibly so, and an unplanned crowd of approximately 300 Valley citizens who had found out about the landing and simply come because of course they had. Orin was in the crowd somewhere. Serafina had made him promise not to push his way to the front, which she knew was a promise he would keep only if something more interesting happened in the middle of the crowd than at the front of it. The shuttle descended slowly. Its engine sound was different from any Valley engine, a low, steady hum with a harmonic overtone that vibrated slightly in the chest, not unpleasant but unmistakably alien. The grass of the field bent in the wind from its descent. The copper sky was clear and bright above it. It landed. The door opened. James Cole came out first. Serafina had seen him on a screen for 5 days. She had looked at his face for hours through the visual link, had studied his expressions and learned to read the small signals in them. But she had not fully prepared herself for the difference between on a screen and in the world. He was taller than she had expected. He moved differently than she had imagined, with a particular kind of deliberate steadiness, the kind that soldiers and leaders develop when they have learned that how they move in a room shapes how everyone else in the room feels. He stepped onto the grass of Valian and stopped. He looked down at his feet. At the silver-green grass. He looked up at the copper sky. He breathed in, and Serafina could see from 50 feet away the particular quality of that breath, the deep, slow, conscious breath of someone who wants to remember the exact sensation of a moment. He had been to other worlds, she suspected. He was a captain of a scout ship. But no human had ever stood on this world before, and he knew it and he wanted to feel it properly. Then he looked up and found her face in the crowd and walked toward her. Behind him, 22 other humans were coming out of the shuttle, and the crowd of 300 Valley citizens was making a sound that was not quite words and not quite silence but something in between, a collective murmur of pure astonishment, because here they were in a field in the morning sun looking at 23 beings from a planet 40 light-years away, and the beings had faces and hands and they walked on 2 legs and they were looking around at everything with exactly the same astonishment that the Valley were feeling. 2 worlds discovering each other in the copper light of a morning neither of them had expected. James stopped in front of Serafina. He was perhaps a head taller than her. He looked at her with the expression she had come to associate with him when he was paying full attention, which was a kind of focused, respectful openness, like a door that was all the way open. Serafina Val, he said, and her name in his voice had the slight imperfection of someone speaking a language that was not native to them but working hard and getting most of it right. Captain James Cole, she said, and his name in her voice had the same quality. Thank you, he said, for hearing us, for listening. Serafina thought about the signal in the night and the voice she had found in its deepest layer, careful and nervous and hoping to be heard. Thank you, she said, for being willing to be heard. Beside her, Elder Marin made a sound that might have been approval. Behind her, she heard Dale say something quiet to the Skyguard officers in a tone that sounded like stand down without the actual words. And somewhere in the crowd, she heard a 16-year-old boy make an extremely undignified sound of pure excited disbelief, because even with a promise to stay in the middle of the crowd, some things are too big to stay quiet about. The humans stayed for 22 days. 22 days that Serafina would spend the rest of her life trying to describe to people who had not been there, and mostly failing because the experience of those 22 days was the kind of thing that language, even the most carefully built language bridge in the galaxy, could only approximate. They stayed in a complex of temporary buildings that the city had prepared on the edge of the open field, buildings that the Valley construction teams had put up in 3 days in a state of focused urgency that was itself remarkable. The humans had brought their own food and water initially, not trusting that Valian's chemistry would be compatible with human biology, which was a reasonable precaution. By the second week after Chief Scientist Pell and her team had done a thorough analysis of biological compatibility, some food exchange was possible, and there were several remarkable shared meals that people talked about for years afterward. Serafina was present for most of the formal sessions. She was also present for many informal ones because she had become the primary language bridge between the two species, and because she found that she did not want to be anywhere that the conversations were not happening. She sat in meetings between human engineers and Valley scientists where knowledge was exchanged at a pace that occasionally made heads hurt on both sides from the sheer density of new information. She sat in the open evenings when the formal sessions were done and the Valley and the humans gathered in smaller groups and talked about their worlds. She translated for hours, smoothing the rough edges of two languages that were becoming more compatible by the day but still had gaps and falls and unexpected sharp corners. She learned things she had not expected to learn. Humans had a concept they called stubbornness that was different from the Valley concept of persistence, and the difference was subtle but important. Persistence, for the Valley, was a measured quality, the steady application of effort over time. Stubbornness, as the humans described it, was something more irrational, more rooted in the will than the mind, a refusal to stop that sometimes went beyond reason and became something closer to pure determination. The humans spoke of this quality with a mixture of self-deprecation and pride that Serafina found fascinating. "It is not always smart," said Yara Chin, the Resolute's chief medical officer, who had a quick, sharp laugh and the habit of saying difficult things in a way that made them easier to hear. "Stubbornness is not always rational. Sometimes humans just refuse to accept a limit because they do not like it. And sometimes that is a disaster. And sometimes that is how they do the impossible." "Does that include coming here?" Serafina asked. Yara looked at her with that quick smile. "Getting humans to agree to send one ship to an unknown world with 23 people and no guarantee of coming back?" She paused. "That took a significant amount of stubbornness from a significant number of people over a very significant amount of time, yes. There was a scientist on the Resolute named Marcus Webb who was officially the mission's xenobiology specialist, which was a title that had, until this mission, been largely theoretical, since no human had ever encountered a living alien species before. He was a quiet man in his mid-30s with thoughtful eyes and the habit of taking notes on a small physical pad with an actual physical writing instrument, which several Valley children who visited the temporary complex found absolutely baffling and then immediately copied. Marcus spent most of his time with Pell and her team, in the kind of scientific conversation that required very little actual language because mathematics and diagrams and specimen samples did most of the talking. But one evening Serafina sat with him in the open area outside the complex while the second moon rose and he was looking at the copper-tinged twilight sky with the particular expression of someone who was seeing something beautiful for the first time. "What does Earth's sky look like at this time of day?" she asked. He thought about it. "It goes orange and pink," he said. "And then purple. And then dark. It is not the same as this, but..." He paused. "It is the same feeling. Looking up and feeling small and glad about it." She thought that was one of the most precisely accurate descriptions of looking at a sky she had ever heard. James Cole spent his days mostly in the formal sessions with Elder Marin and the Council, working through the complicated questions of what this contact meant and what the relationship between the two worlds could or should look like going forward. These were not easy conversations. They were careful, slow, occasionally tense, the way all conversations are when they are genuinely about something that matters. He was good at those conversations. He was good at listening, which was rarer than it seemed, and good at admitting when he did not know something, which was rarer still. He had the quality that the best leaders had, the ability to speak with authority about what they knew and with honesty about what they did not, without the gap between those two things becoming a crisis of confidence. One afternoon, near the end of the second week, he found Serafina at the signal tower, where she had gone to run a maintenance check on the communication equipment. He came up the stairs alone, without the usual attendants and council observers. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. Without anyone else listening. She looked at him. "Ask." "When you found the audio signal," he said. The voice layer. Inside the mathematics. You were the first person from your world to ever hear a human voice. What did you think when you heard it? Serafina considered the question. She had been asked many questions in the past 2 weeks. Almost none of them had been personal in this way. I thought you were afraid, she said. He nodded as if confirming something. Were you? She asked. When you recorded that message to put inside the signal? Yes, he said. I recorded it 11 times before I got one I was willing to send. I kept. He paused, and that self-deprecating expression came across his face. I kept sounding too formal. Too official. Too much like I was making a declaration instead of talking to a person. And the one you sent? The 11th take, he said. I had stopped trying to sound like a captain and I just talked. I said, we are here, we know you are here, we do not want to frighten you, we are hoping you will hear this. Serafina was quiet for a moment. That is what I heard, she said. I did not understand the words. But that is what I heard. James looked at her with those focused, open eyes. Thank you, he said again. He said it the way people say it when they mean something very specific by it that is bigger than 2 words can fully hold. On the 17th day something happened. It happened not between the humans and the Veli but entirely within the Veli Council itself, which made it, in some ways, more complicated than anything that had come before. A faction of council members, led by a man named Councillor Reth, released a public statement without authorization. The statement argued that the council had moved too quickly in granting the human surface access, that the terms of the contact had not been properly debated, that the people of Valian had not been adequately consulted, and that the presence of 23 armed aliens on Valian's surface represented an unacceptable security risk that the council, led by Elder Marin and influenced by the Communication Office's data reader, had failed to properly assess. The statement named Serafina specifically. By morning the statement had spread through the city. By midday there were small groups of people gathered in the public spaces of the Los, not violent, not aggressive, but visible and vocal. By late afternoon the council chamber was in an uproar. Serafina found out about it when Oren came to the signal tower in the middle of the afternoon with a face that was trying very hard to be neutral and mostly failing. There is a thing happening, he said. I can see, she said. She had already been reading the public communication feeds on the monitoring screen for the past hour. They are saying you influenced Elder Marin, Oren said. That you made the decision to invite the humans to the surface sounds simpler than it was. That you were so excited about talking to them that you stopped doing your job objectively. I know what they are saying, Serafina said quietly. Is it true? Oren asked. He said it the way someone says something when they already know the answer but need to hear the other person say it. Serafina looked at her brother. No, she said. It is not true. I reported what I found. I did my job. Elder Marin made the decision to offer surface access, and it was her decision to make. Then why are you not angrier? Oren asked. Serafina thought about it. Because, she said slowly, the people saying these things are afraid. And being afraid when an alien ship appears above your world is not unreasonable. Fear does not make them wrong to be afraid. It makes them wrong only in who they are choosing to direct it at. That evening, Elder Marin held an emergency full council session. It lasted 4 hours. Serafina was not in the chamber for it, but she heard the recording afterward. Elder Marin was magnificent, in the way that a mountain range is magnificent, enormous and unapologetic and completely unmoved by the weather hitting it. She answered every concern systematically. She acknowledged the failures of communication that had allowed the public statement to feel necessary to those who made it. She defended every decision. She stood behind Serafina by name, stating clearly that the data reader's work had been rigorous and objective and essential. The vote to continue the contact on current terms was 31-11. Reth's faction was not satisfied but was outnumbered. What happened next was the part that Serafina did not expect. James Cole asked for permission to address the council directly. Not through Serafina as interpreter but directly, in Veli, imperfect but increasingly functional, in his own voice. Elder Marin granted it. He stood in the council chamber, the first human ever to stand there, tall and steady in the copper light coming down through the crystal dome, and he said in careful and plainly spoken Veli, I understand that some of you do not trust us. I understand that is reasonable. I did not come to your world expecting to be trusted. Trust is built over time and we have had very little time. I want to say only this, if this contact is causing harm to your society, harm to your peace, harm to the unity of your people, then we will leave. I mean that without any condition attached to it. We will go back to our ship and wait, or we will go home entirely, and we will leave the choice of whether to continue this contact to you and to your future, not to us. He paused. We did not come here to make your world harder. We came because we hoped that knowing each other would make both our worlds better. If we were wrong about that, tell us and we will go." The chamber was very quiet. Then Elder Marin said, "You will not go. But the offer tells me something important about who you are. I thank you for it." Later that night, when the council session was over and the crowds in the streets had mostly gone home and the city was settling back into its ordinary sounds, Serafina stood on the roof of the signal tower and looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, in the dark above the copper clouds, the Resolute was still in its orbit, steady and patient and alone. 23 humans, choosing to be patient while the world they had come to find figured itself out. She thought about James Cole standing in the council chamber and offering to leave. The ease of it, the complete sincerity of it, the way it had cost him nothing and everything at the same time, because it was genuinely meant and genuinely costly and genuinely necessary. She thought about what he had said to her about stubbornness. About how sometimes the impossible thing happens because someone refuses to accept that it cannot. She stood on the roof and looked up for a long time. On the 20th day, the Resolute received a signal from Earth. Serafina was in the communications room when it came in, sitting with Kale and doing a routine monitoring check. The signal came through on the deep space frequency that the human ship used for long-range communication, and it was not her business to read it, and she did not read it. But she saw James Cole's face when he came to the surface that afternoon, and she knew that the signal had contained something significant. They walked in the small garden area behind the temporary complex, the one that the Valley groundskeepers had planted with low silver-leaf shrubs between the human buildings in a gesture of simple hospitality that had moved several of the humans considerably. It was the third evening hour and the first sun was already low and the light had gone to the deep amber that preceded the copper sunset. "Your people sent a message," she said. "Yes," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "They want us to come home." She had known it was coming. 22 days had been longer than the mission parameters. She had known from the beginning that this was a temporary stop, not a permanent one. But knowing something and feeling it when it arrives are different things. "When?" she asked. 3 days, he said. "I asked for 3 more days. To close things properly. To do this right." She nodded. They walked in silence for a bit. The silver-leafed shrubs moved slightly in the evening wind. "What happens next?" she asked. "After you go home." "We come back," he said without hesitation. "Not just us. Other ships. Proper delegations. People with the time and the resources to build something real." This trip was the knock on the door. What comes after is the actual relationship. "You are sure they will come back?" He looked at her. "I have 23 people on my crew," he said, "who have been on your world for 20 days and every one of them is going to go home and spend the rest of their lives telling everyone they know what it looks like here, what your people are like, what the sky looks like when both suns set at the same time. That kind of thing does not stay quiet. That kind of thing becomes something." She believed him. Not because she needed to, not because it was comfortable, but because she had spent 22 days learning to read the difference between what he said because he thought it was what someone needed to hear and what he said because he meant it completely. This was the latter. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "When you were in the council chamber," she said. "When you offered to leave. Did you mean it? All the way?" He was quiet for a moment. The amber light moved on his face. "Yes," he said. "Every part of it." "Were you afraid?" she asked. "That they would take the offer?" Another pause. "Yes," he said. "But you made it anyway." "Yes." Serafina thought about the 11th recording. The one where he had stopped trying to sound like a captain and just talked. The one where the fear was in the voice and the hope was in it too, and the two of them together had been the most honest thing she had ever heard from a source she had not understood yet. "I think," she said carefully, "that you are very good at doing frightening things while being afraid." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, became less controlled, more simply real. "I think you are too," he said. She thought about herself in the council chamber 5 days ago, standing in front of 42 people who had all turned to look at her, keeping her voice steady while her hands wanted to shake. She thought about sitting alone in the operations room in the middle of the night, playing an alien voice in the dark over and over, deciding what to do with what she had found. "It is easier," she said, "when you do not feel alone in it." The silence after that sentence had a specific quality that was different from the silences before it. "Serafina," James said. His voice was careful in the same way his 11th recording had been careful. The way something sounds when it has been considered and not rushed. "I want to ask if it would be permitted. If it would be acceptable. For me to." He stopped. She waited. He started again. "When we come back. When the next ships come. I want to ask if it would be possible for me to be on one of them. I am requesting a specific assignment. I put the request in before we left Earth. It has not been approved yet." She looked at him. I want to come back here, he said simply. I want to continue this. She was quiet for a moment. The amber light continued to deepen toward copper. This, she said. He looked at her with those focused, open eyes. All of it, he said. The work, the contact, the bridge building, the conversations. Pause. Specifically these conversations. The garden was very still. The silver-leafed shrubs did not move. The sky was enormous above them. Serafina thought about the moment on the first morning when she had stood at the edge of the market and watched the sky change color and felt that something in the world had shifted without knowing yet what it was. She thought about the voice in the signal, careful and frightened and hoping. She thought about 22 days of learning, of translating, of standing at the edge of something enormous and choosing not to step back from it. She said, I think that can be arranged. He looked at her. She looked at him. And in the amber light of the alien evening, two people from worlds 40 light-years apart stood in a small garden between silver-leaf shrubs and understood each other perfectly, in every language that mattered. On the 22nd morning, the humans left. The whole city came out. Not just 300 people this time, not just the council and the military and the official representatives. The whole city. Families standing in the fields at the edge of the Los, children on their parents' shoulders, old people with walking sticks standing at the highest points they could find. The merchants had closed their market stalls. The healer stations were running on minimal staff. The Sky Guard had abandoned any pretense of maintaining crowd lines. Valian came out to watch because this was the kind of morning that people knew without being told, was one of the mornings that the world would measure time against afterward. A before and after moment. A line in the story of a people. The humans came out of the temporary complex in a group, carrying their cases and their equipment and the gifts that the Vali had given them over the 3 weeks, the carefully chosen things that represented something true about the world they were leaving. Marcus Webb was carrying an armful of dried silver-leafed plants. Yara Chin had a small carved stone from Oren's collection, which Oren had given her on the 18th day with the specific instruction that she take it back to Earth and show it to humans and tell them it came from a Vali river. James Cole walked beside Serafina for the last few hundred feet of the path to the landing site. He did not say much. She did not either. The goodbyes had been said properly the night before, in the long, careful, important conversation that had lasted until the second moon crossed the midline and neither of them had wanted to stop. The things that needed to be said had been said. What remained now was the walk and the sky, and the particular quality of a morning that knows it is carrying something. At the edge of the landing site, he stopped and turned to face her. 3 months, he said. Maybe 4. That is how long before I can request transport back. The approval process is. 3 months is not long, she said. He looked at her. The brown eyes, clear and direct in the copper morning light. No, he said. It is not. He picked up her hand. 4 long fingers, silver skin. He held it briefly in both of his. He said her name once more, the way he said it now, with all the care of someone who had learned a word that mattered and said it correctly. Then he walked to the shuttle. She watched the 23 humans board. Watched the door close. Watched the shuttle rise on its engine hum, the harmonic overtone vibrating in the morning air, the grass bending in the downwash. Watched it climb into the copper sky, getting smaller and smaller until it was a bright point of reflected light, and then just a point and then nothing. The crowd around her was very quiet. 20,000 people, maybe more, all looking up at the same piece of sky where the shuttle had been. Serafina stood among them and looked up too. The sky above Valian was the color of deep copper, the way it always was in the morning, rich and warm and beautiful, and the clouds were moving slowly in the high winds above the city, and somewhere above those clouds, above the atmosphere, beyond the orbital layer, a ship was turning its nose toward home, and 23 humans were beginning the journey back to a blue-skied world 40 light-years away. Beside her, Oren stood with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the sky. They are coming back, he said. It was not quite a question. Yes, she said. You are sure? She thought about a voice in a signal, nervous and hoping, sending itself into the unknown. She thought about a man standing in a council chamber offering to leave when leaving was the last thing he wanted to do. She thought about a small garden with silver-leafed shrubs in the amber evening light, and 2 people from impossible distances speaking clearly to each other in every language that mattered. Yes, she said. I am sure. Oren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to see Earth. Serafina looked up at the copper sky. Maybe one day you will. Maybe one day we will go, he said. Together. She smiled. The full Vali expression of it, the eye movements and the face softening and the particular quality of presence that the expression carried in her people. She smiled and she looked up at the sky where the ship had gone and where the stars would be again tonight, closer now in one sense than they had ever been before, now that some of them had faces. The market sounds began to drift up from the city below as the shops opened again and the ordinary morning reasserted itself in the way that ordinary mornings always do, patient and unhurried, not caring how large the previous event had been. The flowers in the gardens were still open. The birds were still singing in the silver trees. Everything was the same. Everything was different. Serafina Val stood at the edge of the landing field on the copper morning of the 23rd day and looked up at the sky, and the universe, which had been full of unknowns for all of her life and the lives of everyone she had ever known, felt, for the first time, like something she wanted to step further into rather than something she needed to stand guard against. A single human ship had appeared above their world. And the Valley girl who had found a voice in a signal had listened. That, she thought, was where it always began. Not with the arrival. Not with the ship or the signal or the mathematics or the first careful words across the dark. But with the choice to listen. With the choice to hear. With the choice, when something unknown and frightening and enormous arrived above your copper sky, to be the kind of person who stayed at the monitoring screen until the middle of the night and kept looking for what was hidden in the noise. Because sometimes, buried inside what looks like nothing, inside what the automated systems cannot read and what the easy eye would overlook, there is something speaking. Something careful. Something hoping. Something that came all this way across the dark alone just to say, "We are here. We hear you. We are not as different as we feared. We are not alone." The end.